Hi, good evening, and thank you for joining us on day 285 at Good Governance Yaya, GGY. Today we are joined by Angeline, Chris, Dushi, Damaris, Lisha, and we have a very special guest, Kusum Vijayatilaka. Kusum, I'm going to give a little introduction about you, and then we'll move on to the discussion. So Kusum is a media presenter, writer, and political analyst with 15 years of experience in corporate management. He has a degree in accounting and finance and worked in the corporate finance in the banking sector for 10 years. He has also completed a master's in international relations with a focus on American politics, which is quite interesting these days. I see your tweets frequently. He has appeared on television as a resource person and analyst, being featured in major English newspapers, and hosts an interview program for the Daily Mirror Online. He's also a member of the SJB Working Committee. So Kusum, welcome to GGY. We've actually been in touch for some time.
Yes. So I guess before I start, I'll just say thanks for having me, and also a shout out to all of you for having not just this podcast and show, but for the protests that you've been doing for the last so many 200 days. And I think, protesting is kind of become a new phenomenon for members of the middle class in Sri Lanka. And I think we don't quite appreciate it. It's not you appreciate it, but I don't think it's appreciated outside these circles. So I think it's important that what you guys do, even if it's standing on a road with a placard, it means a lot more than perhaps even you realize, because it kind of shows that people have really forgotten what happened just a few years ago. And that's important to send a message out, because someone driving around the street will see you and think, some people will think, what are these people still protesting for? Yeah. But at least a few people will think, they still haven't forgotten. And I think that's pretty important.
Right. I feel personally for us, we started off as protesters, but now we see ourselves more as engaged citizens, engaged citizens.
Activists, if you use the word.
I guess citizen activists.
I know what you mean.
Because I think that engagement is what drove change. Not just the hardcore activists, but the population in general becoming more politically engaged, where they are more in tune with issues and things like that, really help, I think, sort of catalyze that change, right? I think that's sort of where we are. But it'll be nice to get to know you a little bit. I think what we see is your public persona. We see you on Twitter and so on. And we see the usual attacks, right?
Yeah, I haven't had a public persona for very long. Right. So I've been a member of the SJB for about 5 minutes, literally. So prior to that, I was also just another citizen. Right. I'm still pretty much just another citizen. Right. My involvement with the SJB has purely been as a supporter. And very recently, I was invited to be a member of the working committee. I've been advising the leader of the opposition and a few members of parliament from the party for about a year and a half, 2 years. Okay. Mainly on foreign policy. I do a few economic papers, but nothing major for them. I've just for the audience's benefit, I've been a UNP voter my entire life. Right. So
I think most of us have admitted to that too.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly.
But I suppose the thing that I would say is that I'm not strictly a UNPer in that sense. So my mother was very much a UNPer. She's the person who got me into politics, my late mother. But she's a UNPer. Like, she's someone who's a green UNP. I was someone who voted for the UNP out of a lack of alternatives, because I'm essentially a liberal. Like, if you just look at any standard liberal, that's me. I'm very, the median liberal is who I am, my tendencies.
So progressive in your
I wouldn't even call myself progressive. Maybe in a Sri Lankan sense, I might be progressive on some things, but I'm just
politically liberal.
I'm just middle of the road liberal. But I find in Sri Lanka, I would generally vote for a centre-left, or shall we say a centre-left party. But the centre-left parties in Sri Lanka, if you don't mind me saying, are for me a little crazy. As growing up, I looked at them and it never appealed to me for whatever reason. Right. The UNP appealed to me, but it's not kinship. It's not that I would say I really relate to the people in the UNP, or I really understand their point of view. Even on the war, I was not particularly happy with some of the rhetoric that was used by the UNP coming up during that time. Right. So, but at the same time, the centre left, the SLFP in Sri Lanka, and anything to the left, they were just so out there for me that I just couldn't identify.
So being in the public eye, being with the SJB, what are the most common misconceptions? I mean, why don't you clear some of those up?
Yeah.
The common lines of attack that you face, and also give us a little bit about, a little bit of background about
So
you.
interesting you asked this question, right? So on Twitter, you will notice there's two lines of attack on the SJB.
Yeah.
One is that it's too similar to the UNP. That this is just another UNP with different people.
Right.
The other is that the SJB is not like the UNP enough. That they're too socialist, or that they're too leftist, or that they want to give freebies. So, and a lot of the attacks on the SJB are filtered through the leadership, Mr. Sajid Premadas, so who again is caricatured as different things. On one sense, he's caricatured as a person who wants to give everyone, free things and whatever you call it, social welfare. Exactly. On the other side, he's looked upon as another member of a political dynasty, another son of a former president, and
That
status
baggage.
quo, that same baggage. So the SJB having criticism is completely understandable because it is a breakaway from the UNP. I have my own critiques of the SJB myself. I'm to the left of the party on a few things, might be to the right of the party on other things. But generally speaking, I have this idea in politics that, for example, even within the SJB, people criticize saying you are not on message, or one person says one thing, another person says another thing. So the problem is that in Sri Lankan politics, we've become used to the leader giving out this idea for the party, this theme for the party, and everybody's very on point.
Yeah.
That's what we're used to in politics.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Message discipline across.
Message
We see that very much from the
Now in the
NPC.
SJB, it's not there. So in my own experience in the working committee meetings, it's quite lively. There's a lot of things that are said against the leadership, against the leader, and it's a lot more democratic than what appears on the outside. And I see that as a positive. And also, people are quite bothered by the fact that Dr. Harshit De Silva is viewed as someone who's a neoliberal for some reason. Iran is viewed on that spectrum. Sajid Premadas is viewed on a completely different side of that spectrum.
Yeah.
And they see this as a negative. First of all, I don't think those differences, because if you take the political spectrum, the SJB is a liberal party. And on that liberal spectrum, there are different placements. I accept that.
Yeah.
But I think this is probably the best situation for the country in the sense that you have an amalgamation of political thought and ideology that's sort of found its way into a middle ground. And I think the Blueprint 2.0, and there's a newer version coming out, it's a good amalgamation of all those political angles.
Okay, so the strength of the SJB in the eyes of many is the economic team, right? I think we hear that, and I think even amongst us we sort of agree, right? I mean, Harsha, Iran, Kabir, they're respected. I think they can be accepted by a wide swath of society. Then what value does the SJB gain by bringing in former Vietmaga people into it? How does that, I mean, that sort of mixes up the economic message, right?
Sure.
What value does the GLP research and the Nalaka Kodehevas bring to the SJB? And how do you reconcile the economic message between that and what, what you...
From a personal point of view, when I was invited to join, or let's say, even having voted for the SJB, I was never happy with 100% of the people who were a part of the SJB. And I can safely say that some of the people that have joined, not my cup of tea, not particularly people I would have invited. And I don't mean to rationalize this for anybody. Everyone's an adult here, right? Politics is about trade-offs. And when I look at this...
but is the trade-off worth it?
It remains to be seen. For me, I would say no. For me, but then it remains to be seen, right? Because the point is that on one side, everyone says that it's too much like the UNP. On the other side, you're saying that it's too far less.
No, but the thing is, I mean, now if you look at Nalaka Kodeheva and GLPs in particular, they're SLPP
and SLFP
plus an SLFP plus their nationalist seats. They don't come with a vote base either.
Sure.
So what exactly is the value
of political signaling, Chamin, in my opinion, because it kind of, because if you're I know a lot of Vietmaga supporters,
right?
Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't need to denigrate them. I make fun of them when I see them now, right? You have to. But the fact of the matter is, they need a little permission, a signal to
that
support the SJB.
Right.
And what they see from the SJB, I'm just telling you their perspective. They see typical centre-right, Thatcherite, small government, libertarian types who are just like Ranil, who just don't care about local industry, who just want to open up our country, liberalize, that's their take. So they'll see Nalaka Kodeheva coming and say, at least this guy's coming in, maybe there's a little bit of a chance that our ideology is also included. What I would say is, now I would be way more critical of Mr. Kodeheva specifically if I saw a change in the ideology and the policies of the SJP, but nobody on, and I've asked this on Twitter, if you can show me where the ideology or the policy has changed in the SJP, I'll attack it with you, right? But I haven't seen that happen.
So you're saying this is tent building, you're building a bigger tent.
I think it's
it's electoral politics.
Big tent and it's signaling. It's
right. No, because we have seen other SLPP members being accepted over the last couple of days as well.
SLPP.
SLPP.
Yeah.
Was it
SLP?
There was one member from the SLPP.
Right.
And I think there was another member who's not from the SLP, from a different party.
From SLFP, no? There was an MP.
There were
some unheard of
Yes,
again, I'll admit, I'm from Colombo. I know very little about the structure of the party outside Colombo and Western Province in general. And what I know from the little I know about regional politics in Sri Lanka is that you need a team. And you need people from the grassroots. And I think whatever else I say about the SLPP, they're extremely well funded and extremely well organized. And the SJB has a way to go in meeting that level, because primarily it's not about organization, it's about funding, I'll be really honest. The SLPP outfunds every party combined. Like if I know for a fact during the last general election that there was one member from the SLPP in the Mathura district that spent 300 million on his campaign, whereas the SJB equivalent spent 30 million.
But the danger is that those same funding, because where is that money coming from, will perpetuate all the stuff that we are fighting against.
100%.
Right? Because as we see this happening in the UNP right now, because there's no real UNP, it's just a de facto same.
I mean, I understand that every party has baggage, but you're diluting your purity to a certain extent by adding these elements into your
If I can just interject, Mr. Godeva, Mr. GLPs, etc., are not members of the SJP. They're members of an SJP-led alliance. And they're not members of the SJP Working Committee. They haven't entered any meetings with the SJP that are just for the SJP. They're not formulating policy as far as I can see. Again, if I'm mistaken and if there is a policy that has clearly changed since Nalak Godeva came in, I'd like to see it because it hasn't happened. As far as I can see.
Okay, so it's electoral politics.
May I ask, what would people like that gain from joining the SJB? I mean, will they be given nationalist seats? Please tell me no.
I hope not. I would be the first person to criticize.
So they need to run on their own steam.
Yes, they have run on those. And I have to say...
these are people who've been in politics for decades and decades. If they can't command some votes to get into parliament, then they shouldn't be.
Look, if the SJB's national list looks like every other national list, then we have a problem, right? So the whole idea that I support the SJB, a lot of other people I know support the SJB is because they want something different. And you're saying with the NPP, by the way. A lot of people don't expect the NPP to go into power and then just have the same kind of national list. You need, to be honest, a country like us right now should not have the president being the Minister of Finance. If you have a financial collapse precipitated by debt sustainability, you have to have an economist as the finance minister, and that should have been number one. Now,
that's been one of our cries.
We have said that from the beginning. The executive power bleeding into the legislature as well.
And not just that,
and Parliament.
Not just that. I mean, just think about that. You can't, the president, an executive president, finance minister, defense minister.
Yes.
Right? So those three, what else is that run the country?
And the parliament. He exercises.
And the parliament. So this is completely, I mean, okay, so can you give me 2 minutes, right?
Of course,
so there's a big conflating that's happened in this conversation, right? Everyone talks about when we collapse. The country's economic collapse is now, everyone looks at it through the prism of our structural economic weaknesses. That is our budget deficit, lack of exports, the lack of export diversification, that kind of thing. I just want to explain to people that those structural weaknesses that the Sri Lankan economy had are not unique to Sri Lanka, right? I can name any number of countries that have the exact same structural weaknesses. But when the Sri Lankan economy collapsed, we were in the top 5 for highest inflation in the world. We were in the top 3 for the highest currency crash, the highest currency depreciation in the world. So that means even though our problems were not unique, our collapse was unique. Our collapse was not because of our structural issues. Our collapse was because of the failure of governance and a management deficit.
Right.
The problem was that you had people over a 2-year period that allowed policy to be enacted without adequate deliberation, without consultation, and without people in the bureaucracy and on the cabinet and in parliament pushing back. Right. And why did that happen? It's because one person was able to handpick people and put yes men into specific positions, whereby even if you're on the cabinet and you're in that big powerful room with multiple people or with ties with computers and stuff, you never stood up. Not Kanchana Vijaysekara, not name me a MP. Tell me,
so Sharon said the thing, all the ones that have been lauded right now, they all nodded along to everything that you were saying.
They just said yes to everything.
And I have to say, the idea of a revenue-based fiscal consolidation is not 2019 or 2021 or 2022. It's 2016 at the latest, which is where the IMF told us you need to increase your revenue. Right? So that has been the case since 2016. So how did, in 2019, a manifesto by a presidential candidate which says we're going to cut taxes across the board, unfunded tax cuts, how did that gain such wide public approval? And not only did it gain public approval, it had the approval of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, it had the approval of business leaders.
They didn't speak a word.
So you're telling me none of them
knew that. As a prosperity.
Yeah, so you're saying none of them knew that Sri Lanka had a decades-long problem of raising revenue? None of them knew that? They should have known that. So the finance ministry is full of economists. I know some of them. They're extremely bright. We are talking about some of the best economists in the country. You're telling me none of them saw this?
Right. So lack of stakeholder consultation. I think that we see as a problem even now.
Right now,
None of them are willing to stand up because they're scared.
How many people at this Chamber of Commerce have raised questions, say, about a visa issue or any of the issues that we keep
You're right. So it's left up to the activists and
they've just parked it to that space.
And concerned journalists to bring it up, but really we don't see it from the industry bodies as much.
Yeah.
But everything that you mentioned was identified in the diagnostic report by the IMF. And despite that, all the pieces of legislation that are coming through right now have the same exact flaws.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that characterization? Because we see bills coming in that are rushed, that are opposed by human rights organizations, then we see unsolicited bids, which specifically in the diagnostic report said should not happen. So,
I mean, there were examples in the diagnostic report, such as there was a water project that was specifically mentioned, there was a road project that was specifically mentioned. So you can you don't have to do any work now. The IMF has told you these projects have a problem. Go and look at those projects.
Even the wind power one is case in point, right?
Right now.
Just basically mortgaged our entire power sector to
the Adani power
and it specifically said procurement should have transparency.
Yeah.
They specifically called for a procurement committee. And I think there's legislation for a procurement committee that's just not being passed. So my problem, when someone says stability, I think you have to understand the use of the word is very intentional. What does stability do? Stability is about maintaining a certain status quo, right? That's all we're doing right now.
Right.
What we're doing, even with the debt restructuring, there's a fantastic article on the Financial Times by Brad Sester, and this is the Financial Times, the global Financial Times, so not a leftist rag or anything like that. They are very clear that some of the goals that the IMF have given us are quite fanciful. I mean, and it's quite scary for me reading that because they are looking at, for example, Zambia. Zambia is a country which has very similar debt to GDP as us, exports, similar export level, higher export level, but similar debt and similar revenue issues. They have been given a much tighter set of targets. And Sri Lanka, on the other hand, we have been given a tight set of targets with a very low revenue threshold. So if you look at the IMF projections, the highest our debt to our revenue to GDP is 15% starting from next year. Currently, we are at revenue to GDP of about 10%. That is with all this VAT. We had 20% in 1990. So if you look at the graph from 1990 onwards, our revenue to GDP is coming down. And then the only thing that Yahapalya tried very hard to increase. So if you remember, Ravi Karunanayake introduced a one-off super gains tax on all profits over 2 billion rupees. That was a one-off 1 point. It was not a huge percentage, it was a few percent, but it made a big difference. And if you look at our revenue to GDP, it ticked up slightly. Yeah. But even then, even under an IMF program in 2016, the Ranil Wickremesinghe government, in each of their 4 complete years, they managed to increase tax to GDP to 11%. The highest was 11.3 or 11.4, right? So I have to, it's not to scare anybody, but even if we reach the IMF, if we stick to everything the IMF says, and we hit every single target, which I don't think we've hit, we have not hit a single budget For the revenue, if you can just check. I don't think maybe the latest one. We have
also a lot of the transparency targets have not been met. Like
but
publishing reports,
the transparency is one thing. But if we achieve the revenue that they want us to achieve, and our debt becomes sustainable according to their analysis,
right.
If you just go to the latest press release from the IMF, if you go all the way down there, and there's a nice box. It shows about 30 or 40 economic indicators. Just go and scroll to the right and see what it says in 2027 and 2028. We have a higher total external debt than we do today. Yeah. We will have a public debt to GDP of about 105% of GDP. Right now we're at 114%.
And it will get worse.
Yeah, it will. The worst thing is there's a massive $50-60 billion trade deficit.
Right.
Which continues throughout the program.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you, you'll have this on record, right? 2029, 2030, 2031, there'll be another IMF program guaranteed. Because there's no way out of it.
Well, that brings us to my second slide, which is, sorry, it's not advancing here. Sorry. This one. So let's talk about this since we're on the subject. So the president warns of another economic collapse in 5 years. This is what the president has said. So essentially the president highlighted the importance of adhering to IMF agreement to achieve economic stability and stressed the need for a shift towards an export-oriented economy.
Yes, yeah.
Right? That's been the story, right? That's what they've been saying. How does the SGB view the current IMF agreement, and what specific strategies does the party propose to achieve these sort of ambitious goals? Right? We've got to reduce debt, we've got to increase GDP growth, boost export revenue. Like, what specific strategies can the SGB bring to bear?
So everything is dependent on what is called the debt sustainability analysis, right? So the IMF has a debt sustainability model that they enter Sri Lanka's things into. Now, if you look at the current IMF program, there are a number of broad targets. So the most popular target that you hear on the news is a primary account surplus of 2.3% of GDP. Okay, so that just means that we have to make sure we, before we deduct our interest and other expenses, that our revenue is 2.3%. Our revenue minus cost is 2.3% of GDP. Already very difficult to achieve, but that's one.
Yeah.
Another one is foreign service debt coverage. So that means how much foreign debt do we have to cover? Interest. Yeah. So currently we are at 9% of GDP. They want us to halve that to 4.5% of GDP. The other broad target is just broad public debt to GDP. How much debt does the government have? So currently when we crashed, we were at 120%. 128%.
It's come down slightly, yes?
Maybe at 114 right now. Okay, so we are supposed to bring that down to 95% by 2032. Now, these targets are given to us not for any other reason, that they are saying if we reach these broad targets, the amount of debt our country has is sustainable. That's all they're saying, right? Now, as far as the SGB is concerned, I'll just tell two things. Okay, one, if you're Dr. Harshad, a lawyer, Honorable Iran Ratna, whoever, and you plan to be a part of the next government, and you're in a IMF program as we speak, and there's a tranche that has to be reviewed, and we have to get that basis. You can't really go on media and sort of say, no, we don't think this is going to work, and you have to be a little bit diplomatic when it comes to the IMF. Okay, so I can say things that maybe they're not able to. I don't think that, I'll put it to you this way, meeting the IMF targets is a necessary requirement for Sri Lanka's financial stability and future, but it will not be enough. It's not even close to being enough. Okay, so what the SGB do differently right now, the first thing is aiming for 15% tax to GDP is ridiculous. I mean, we're going to struggle to get there, but it's not enough. So you understand the problem we have, right?
Yeah.
It's not enough, and we're not even going to get there, not that I can tell.
Yeah.
So, and why is that? Because Sri Lanka's, and you showed those statistics before from the public finance.
We'll come to that. So yeah. If you want me to put it up, I can put it up.
No, I'll just explain. Like, if you look at the ADB released a chart in 2022, I included in one of my articles. If you look at all the countries, peer group countries in the lower middle income bracket, Sri Lanka is at the lowest for revenue. And when you look at the source of revenue, we have the lowest corporate income tax to GDP and the lowest income tax to GDP. So where else is that money coming from? It's coming from indirect taxes, which are, as you said, everyone knows it's regressive. So first and foremost, I would invite anybody to go to this Colombo Stock Exchange website, pick any conglomerate you want, go to their profit and loss account or their cash flow statement and calculate their tax. It's very easy to calculate, right? You will not get 36%. There is no corporate in the country that is, I don't think, maybe a financial sector organization, maybe or alcohol or maybe gambling, even then I don't think they're touching the 36% because
they're not even paying.
They're not paying.
Right? So what generally happens is...
And the sunshine tax holidays.
Right, exactly.
Exactly. So what you have is a 36% top tax rate, but then there are certain allowances. So when you hear a businessman say high taxes put off business investment, that's a lie because there are tax write-offs. There are capital investment write-offs. So if you're making an investment, you can get a write-off. And if that's not the case, you can write that into law. So that doesn't mean that a high tax rate automatically puts off investors. So that's one.
Nishan told us all about this.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Nishan
I saw that.
Yeah, public.
So again, the SJB proof one thing would make, and the other thing is, if you look at personal income tax slabs, the highest rate is 36%, which might seem high. And if you go to some of the East Asian countries, it's about 35-36%. Yeah. But none of those countries are in a fiscal consolidation like us. Yes. They are not in a revenue emergency like us.
But how many people actually even pay that? That's the problem.
And just think, if it's 36%, Chaminda, you can earn 2 million rupees and you pay 36%. I can earn 10 million rupees, I'm still paying 36%. Mm-hmm. And that's the problem. Right? That's the problem. So if your company is making 2 billion, you will pay 36%. If your company is making 8 billion, you're still paying 36%. That's the problem. Yeah. That's why we're not getting our revenues in. Right? And the other thing is, what is income tax is a factor of what? Income. So we are in a state where we are contracting the economy, but we're trying to raise income tax. So if incomes are coming down, how are we going to raise income tax?
Just look at the number of actual individuals who are even paying it, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it just doesn't add up at all.
I have to say there's a culture, right, in Sri Lanka where most of the middle class don't use government services, right? I've used the bus service when I worked in Kalutara for 6 months. I haven't used the bus service otherwise. I don't go to state hospitals. I use private healthcare. I went to an international school, so I don't go to the local schools. So then they automatically don't see any point in paying taxes. I don't get anything out of it, no. So
somebody else made the same argument.
It's a failure of understanding this social contract issue because they think, why should I pay for a freebie? Yeah. It's not a freebie. It's better for the economy and for society as a whole if everybody's educated. That's the idea. Nobody's saying people should have free education because we feel better about ourselves. That's not why free education was invented in the first place. Yeah. It was invented so you can have more people entering the labor market, which is better for business. Yeah. So even business people, they're so caught up in this profit idea and the short-term idea of profit that they don't think what will it do for my business if more people have more income. Like automatically, just think, it's very easy. Right, but what's happened, and this is not just Sri Lanka, this is worldwide. You have seen worldwide, right? There are studies on this. Investments in public services coming down. Debt on the other side is going up because people can't afford hospitals, people can't afford education. So then debt goes up. And then when there's a little bit of a external issue like COVID or a war or something, those people in debt have big problems because if your interest rate goes up a few percent, you're in trouble, right? So this is happening throughout the world. This is kind of what's called this neoliberal phenomenon, right? So it's not as straightforward as people think, but it's more insidious, right? It's sort of, if you in the UK, brilliant example. There was a study a year ago that showed the UK government becoming poorer over the last 25 years because it's privatized all its assets. It's sold off most of the council estates, and the wealth of the UK government...
Thatcherism.
Yeah, exactly. The wealth of the UK has collapsed. At the same time, the middle class has collapsed. So then where's the money gone? There's still wealth in the economy. And the same thing is here, right? If you go to get... what is today? Is it Wednesday?
Yes.
Right. So if you can call Shangri-La and get a buffet table on a Wednesday night.
No, you can't get
it's not going to be easy.
Or lunch.
ITC, right? The new hotel. You can't get a reservation till next month.
Yeah.
You can't.
But a lot of it is also, I think, people
cash
are paying
transactions.
Cash. All the black money.
But the idea is that it's a divergent economy.
Yeah.
And it's taking place everywhere in the world.
It's an economy that works for a few at the expense of the many.
Yes.
So
precisely.
So what specifically will the SJB do? I know we don't have like a whole lot of time.
But the tax slabs have to be fixed because there has to be equity in this situation, right? The second thing is we introduced Aswasuvanu. Aswasuvanu has the same problems that Samurdhi has. Is that it's not properly targeted, right? And the other thing is, you will hear so many people, especially in our society, say that Sri Lanka gives too many freebies, that the Sri Lankan government is too big, that the Sri Lankan government spends too much. But ask anybody to show you some data on that. There is no data anywhere that shows that Sri Lanka spends more money than a peer group country on social services. We already know that we don't spend as much as our peer groups on health and education.
No, we don't. In fact, that's one of our key sort of...
and if you look at our total government spending to GDP as a percentage, it's about 12 to 13%. And the countries in that range are like Lebanon, Haiti, Botswana, like those countries. A country that's advanced spends 50% of GDP on public spending, because as the country develops, lo and behold, the people in that country want better services.
Right.
So in Sri Lanka, we have this idea, and this is part of the reason why Ranil Wickremesinghe, I believe, will always fail, is that he, like you said, he's a Thatcherite. He doesn't believe that government is there to solve people's problems. He doesn't see it that way. And I have people instinctively think, because government has failed so miserably in every way imaginable, that government is automatically bad. But every country in the world has developed through some sort of government planning. There is no country that's developed based on the free market. It just hasn't happened. Even a country like Singapore had huge state intervention. It still does to this day, if you think about it. It has major services. It spends 20% of GDP on social services.
Yeah.
So I think that this understanding of Sri Lanka's economic structure is something that we have to change, at least in our society, because we are kind of looking at the problem in the wrong way. There's a reason the IMF is telling us to increase revenue and not cut costs. Yeah. Have you seen the IMF tell us to cut costs?
No.
They haven't.
No, they have.
They have said rationalization.
Right, so that'll bring us to the other question of where does the revenue come from. We'll get to that. Yeah. But before that, let's address a few political questions.
Sure, yeah.
So this article is from yesterday, where the president saying country's economic recovery was achieved by prioritizing ability and competence over political considerations. I can't even say it with a straight face. So what is the opposition's view on this? Because this is again going to the argument that only Ranil could have done it, and stability and all of that.
Okay,
how would the SJB have handled it differently if they did have that opportunity at that moment?
I mean, first of all, the IMF negotiation should have gone differently to this. Okay, so we discussed that.
Sure.
We'll go into that.
Yeah.
When people say only Ranil can, I mean, what are they basing that on? I mean, what makes you say that? It's not. I don't mind you saying Ranil can, but I want to know what the basis is for you thinking that. Right?
Well, they'll show the fact that we have fuel and power.
Exactly, I was about to say fuel, power and gas, and that is all that's
right. I mean, fuel and power and at any cost. It's not really like going back to
so
the
then the idea
is
what is the cost of our stability, right? So the cost is clear. We have now, we are in the top 5 most unequal countries in the Asia Pacific. We have record wealth inequality. What was it? It was the top 1% own 30% of all wealth, and the bottom 50% of income earners own less than 4% of private wealth.
Is that a fact?
That's a fact. That's a UNDP. Yeah? That's again not some leftist track. That's a UNDP.
Okay.
So, and they have a Sri Lankan researcher who's heading that program. So they know what they're talking about. So the top 1% of income earners own 30% of total private wealth in Sri Lanka, and the bottom 50% income earners own less than 4%. Right, so we are talking about United States level of inequality. Yeah. Like we used to laugh at India for these, very dramatic castle in one side and a slum next to it. But I think the problem is for someone like me, growing up in Colombo, I've grown up in Colombo my whole life, and you go 2 kilometers out of Colombo, things haven't changed. But things in Colombo have changed. Like there's Lamborghinis now. When I was growing up, there was no Lamborghinis in Colombo. I mean, to see a swept-up Merc was a big thing. Now I don't know how many Lamborghinis we have in Colombo, but has Sigiriya got toilets, decent toilets for you to go and use in that mean?
Or look at the education system.
I mean, but let's say that's
rural
complicated.
School and it tells you
but the education system is complicated to fix. Can you fix a toilet in Sigiriya for your revenue earning? Even that they haven't done, like the basic things. So what the SJB would have done differently in this situation, first of all, what are your priorities? The priority should have been the poorest people in the country, because our country didn't crash in 2022. I had a travel business, which I had 15 people. I cut down to 7 when the bomb went off. It was 2019. And I did that because in 2018, I had lost about 10 bookings because of the political coup. because of the constitutional crisis.
Yeah.
And by the way, I was outside Temple Trees with my wife. It was her first protest, and we were protesting in favor of Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Yeah,
First political protesting
That was our gateway into protesting, actually. That was a gateway.
So the Sri Lankan
protesting for most of
economy
us.
started going down since then. So this crisis is not new. So if you're, as soon as the IMF came, I urge people to just go and read any IMF report from any country in the 2005 to 2010 period and read what they're talking about now. Their entire discourse has changed because this idea of the IMF being some evil, neo-imperialist, extractionist organization came about because of their past actions. They apologized for their policies in Greece. They apologized officially for their policies for Greece, and they have released several statements, including from their CEO at the time, saying that they made mistakes in Ukraine, they made mistakes in the 1990s with the Asian financial crisis. This is all documented. But it's only in Sri Lanka that we are looking at the IMF as if they're a development partner. The IMF is not a development partner. They are a fiscal consolidation or a liquidity solvency partner. They are not here to ensure that you develop. Yeah. That's why when you look at their own projections, we have such a big trade deficit. So have you all heard of any long-term plan? You mentioned it, export-oriented. That's what the president has mentioned, those words 3 or 4 times in speeches, because I have to read his speeches. I know he's mentioned it 4 or 5 times. Yeah. Have you seen any policy related to our exports in the last 2 years? Can you name one policy? In fact,
tourism, he keeps harping on.
Yeah. Exactly. It's better than nothing, I guess. But honestly, one of the first things they did because they were so focused on the fiscal consolidation, they cancelled the concessionary taxes for the exporters. But if you think of what our problem is exports. Our problem is dollars.
We haven't grown our economy. I mean, we haven't.
I mean, it has actually shrunk, right? And now with what's going on with the visa, you can see there's definitely going to be an issue for tourism.
If you look at the top 3 forex earners, which is tourism, garment, and tea, right? Tea? Would that be the top 3?
Labor export.
Labor, tourism, and garments. Apart from the garment industry where there's some value addition, we're just exporting our natural resources. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, tourism is just purely, there's very little value addition in tourism either, right?
Yeah, and this is all, again, this is not our opinion, because if you go and look at any of the economies in our region, or any economy, just take, every economy is constituted by X, Y, and Z. So you have certain types of exports, right? Tourism, etc. One of the exports is industrial exports, high technology exports, electronic exports.
Right.
Sri Lanka's share of global trade in that is 0.1% or something. Yeah. Right? So we have 0 high-tech exports. We don't manufacture any technology components.
Right.
The best we do is assembly. And that's not real value addition.
So explain to me, first of all, components of the SJB have been parts of governments in the past, right? Parts of Ranil's governments in the past. And Ranil has been 6-time PM, and he's been in this arena for 45 years plus. Why the dissonance about the man now? Like, why do you think that is? Like, suddenly, a lot of people see him as somebody who can actually turn this around. So one, can the SJB make a good faith effort, because they have all been parts of governments in the past, to turn this around? And is it going to be any different to what Ranil offers? Because people see him as suddenly as some kind of a savior, right, after all these years.
Yeah, I mean, the policies of the SJB, I think they're all more or less, the Blueprint 2.0 explains the export side of it pretty well in terms of joining global production networks. Okay, the large majority of trade is now not you manufacture a product and sell it to a company in another place. It's a multinational that manufactures a phone, a car, an engine, a camera, by bringing in components that are manufactured in other countries at lower cost, bringing it somewhere, assembling it and sending it off. So we have to be the place where not where they assemble it, but where even a small chip is manufactured, or even a transistor. We need to be that kind of economy. So that vision is there in the SJ.
Yeah.
The other aspect is the main problem that the SJB faces is that the leadership is very clear on that we have to support, we have to put a ceiling, we have to put a floor under the poorest people in the country, right?
Social safety net.
So a social safety net.
Right.
That social safety net is not something that's beyond the IMF. Everyone thinks, the SJB wants to do something, the IMF wants. Read the IMF's own commentary. They use the abbreviation SSN, social safety net. They use the exact same term. Sri Lanka, they said Sri Lanka should bring in, they have brought a cap on how little they are allowed to spend on social safety nets as a percentage of GDP, simply because of their previous experiences with other countries. Because they went into those countries and they brought in austerity, and those countries did the easy thing. They cut costs and they cut social services on the people that have the least lobby, right? It's easy, because if you're in power, the poorest people can't do anything to you until the election. Same thing that's happening, and I'll just point out the same thing happened during Yapali. I voted for Yapali in the idea that you would come in and you would do something to materially benefit the people. They went in and the first thing they did was, we need a fiscal consolidation. Understood, because maybe the debt was reaching unsustainable levels. But at the same time, you go and check. Our total net spending on social services went down. Our net spending on Samruddhi went down. So
and borrowing also increased.
And borrowing increased.
Mainly for debt servicing, if I'm not mistaken.
And won't have time, but there are investments in the ISBs.
And the ISBs.
That investment in the ISBs is what's right now
hurting us.
Yeah, exactly.
It's hurting us.
And the other guys not coming to the table on the debt restructuring.
I should have sent you this chart because it very clearly shows, if you take our total debt portfolio, the ISB level was about this much. 2015 it went to about 20%, and by the time the Yapali finished, it was at 40% of total debt.
Which is what SLPP keeps also harping on.
But that's true.
But
that's true.
Do you have a sort of an idea as to why they were so heavily invested in ISB?
Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy actually gave a pretty robust defense of this, and he went in billions of dollars, and he said we borrowed $2 billion for this, $3 billion for this. I don't mind. He has an explanation for why they did it.
Okay.
But my point is, did you not consider that international sovereign bonds get more expensive based on your economic performance, right? They are more expensive not just in terms of interest, instead of coupons, but because you have to go through these financial institutions, you would get charged a little commission there. There are these charges that you pay. Okay, so all that included, and knowing that because you have so many different entities investing, when you have a restructuring, you have this very same problem because you have to bring together a migrate bunch of creditors and get them to all agree on one thing. And that's the exact same problem we are having here. And I just want to point out, the current IMF program necessarily requires that we go back to the international sovereign bond market in 2028.
Yes.
They are asking us to go back to the bond market. And there's a reason for that. It's because within the IMF, there are two debt sustainability analysis frameworks. One is for low income countries, and one is for what they call market access countries. Sri Lanka has found itself in this market access basket, whereas countries like Ghana and Zambia, which are roughly very similar economies to us, they have found themselves in the low income bracket. Now, when you go to the market access sustainability targets, they are looking at certain indicators in our economy, but they are not looking at, for example, our level of exports. So, if they look at our level of exports, there is no way you can conceivably, reasonably say that this country can afford this much foreign debt. The point is foreign debt. So, the idea that we got into this trouble because of foreign debt, but the IMF's whole idea is to get us into a position where we are once again acceptable to capital markets.
So basically we are increasing our exposure, which actually means that we are subject to another default somewhere down the line, unless we grow our economy in a sustainable way, right? I mean, that's basically what it means.
And my problem with Ranil's statement is he's right. But why didn't you have 2 years now? You should have had an industrial policy. That should have been your first step.
First step, absolutely. Yeah.
Too many trips.
So let me make a Ranilist argument here. Okay, let me play the devil's advocate. So some measure of stability has been achieved. Okay. If there is a change of government,
I won't agree with that. Some level of stability.
I know. Sure. I said that's why I said caveat is that I'm making the Ranilist argument here, right? Some measure of stability for some, let's say, has been achieved. By changing government now, or with the SJB or the NBB or some combination comes in, will it mess up?
No, classic argument.
Will it mess up what's already been achieved? Are we going to, go backwards? and then we have to start again. Is that?
So again, the premise of the question is the problem. So if you're saying that the current status quo
is... This is something we hear
all the time.
regularly, right?
So,
in our circles, right?
So the question you're asking is what is the solution? But the point is that this is not a solution. Like, this is only halfway to the solution. So Ranil, if you want to give him credit for going into the IMF for the 17th time, by all means do it. Give him credit, okay? But what are you doing beyond that?
But we have to be clear. We actually ended the IMF program under Gotabaya Rajapaksa, didn't we?
Did you sign the review under him?
I think we did.
He started the
process under him.
After his homegrown solutions didn't quite materialize.
Somebody might have to fact check that.
Yeah, I just fact
checked. If I remember correctly,
you're right. He finally
went under. So, we're giving him the credit. But actually, the SJB has been saying go to the IMF a lot longer than that.
Much longer.
Yes.
No?
So the question,
Harsh always makes that point, doesn't
the question of whether we are going to mess up what we have achieved, I have to ask you think what we have achieved is enough?
Yeah.
Right? So messing up means we lose access to the IMF funds and we lose access to other multilateral funds. That's the biggest mess up we can have.
Yeah.
And in that case, if you have so little confidence in the NPP and the SJB, I'm afraid then you'll have to vote for the UNP. But then I have to say that you have to present a better basis for why you would vote for the UNP, because what they've done so far is what they did in 2016. And where did that leave us? It brought another ultranationalist. Just understand that every wave of ultranationalism that Sri Lanka has had somehow comes on the back of a Ranil Wickremesinghe executive premiership or presidency.
And the collapse of the government.
Right.
So the president has called for unity, right? Setting aside political difference to advance the country's economic recovery and development, right? That's been the call. So how does the opposition plan to respond to this call for unity?
So,
what are your plans to either support or critique the current government's initiatives?
First of all, Chavinda, when someone says they need to put politics aside, it's a very revealing statement, right? So that means they are in politics
for the wrong reason.
Meaning, that means politics doesn't mean anything to them, right? That means politics is just another word.
Game of chess.
It's just a game of chess.
But it's a very populist kind of statement to make as well, right?
Yeah,
I mean it seems like you're taking the high road
for the
sake of the country.
Yeah, it just means that people haven't understood what politics really means, because we are so used to people being interchangeable in terms of parties. Recently, there was a crossover from the Conservative benches onto the Labour side in the UK just last week. That doesn't happen very often. It's happened like 4 or 5 times in 20 years. That's because if you're a member of the Conservative Party, that means you have a set of principles and a set of values that are aligned with that party. Right. So that's why for me, when I read the NPP's manifesto, I don't see a Marxist-Leninist party. I see a very moderate, left-of-centre party.
Us too.
Yeah.
We made that point.
When I see the JVP's rhetoric, it's Marxist-Leninist. So I'm not a Marxist. So I have a problem, because I can't say I put politics aside and join the Marxist. Would you take me seriously if I said I'm going to join the Marxist tomorrow, Machan? I'm going to put politics aside? No, you'd laugh at me. You're like, so now you're a Marxist. Yeah. You went from being a liberal, pro-capitalist to a Marxist.
Yeah.
Because you want to put politics aside for the best of the
That means your principles are malleable.
Yeah, that means you have no principles to begin with, right? Yeah. Because that's essentially what we're saying.
That's politics.
Right.
So, so if Ranil Wickremesinghe, and the other point, a unity government. What does a unity government mean? That means everyone's on the same side. So, didn't Sri Lanka crash because everybody was in agreement with the same set of policies? And when Gotabaya left office, one of the things I noticed in one of the first speeches he said after he ran away was he said having this presidency and a prime minister is a problem. You have to have either one strong president or one strong prime minister. That's because they don't like this division of powers. That's because having a check and a balance on one of the branches of government is a problem for them, because they want absolute power.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's why even from the perspective of a liberal, I'm not convinced on this abolishing of the presidency thing. I think having a check and a balance, having 3 branches of government may not be the worst thing, because I see that the people in power, every time Ranil gets into power, he weakens one of the branches of government.
Yeah, but that's the whole point with the executive, right? Because the executive
unless
has
you're willing
control.
To repeal all of those powers. And
exactly, because right now he has power over the other 2.
He exercises certain power over the judiciary because he's not following judicial orders, right? Having elections and things like that.
Yeah. So I don't think that this argument that we should unite is a problem, because one thing, even as a member of the SJB, if the SJB wins a huge majority, I may have to leave the party, because I don't think one party should have so much power in a parliament.
Well,
you should
but
have
also it doesn't
not
track with the demands of the Aragale, like what we fought for, the people fought for.
Yeah, but no one cares about Aragale now, right?
We care. That's why we still
that's the problem. That's the problem.
And I think people still want what they demand.
Good governance.
Yeah,
let's forget the
Aragale. You don't need a strong opposition to have good governance.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very fair point. So I think the SJB missed a lot of tricks during the Aragale, because they just didn't ingratiate themselves enough to the Aragale for whatever reason. I can't speak to that.
I think it was a stolen, right? I mean, if you really look at it, the pure...
Also, the ones who did flipped over.
Exactly.
And
where are they right now?
Right, exactly.
Nothing disappoints me more than when people denigrate the Aragale, because it's a very easy target also now after everything that's happened. But it's kind of, it hurts. Even though I wasn't a big part of the Aragale, I went with my wife and all that. I found myself outside Ranil's house the day it was burned down, and now somehow people on Twitter say that you were also responsible, because I sent a message saying, come and protest outside Ranil's house. And my wife...
He has a CR book full of names.
We have all the names that people have been arrested so far for burning the house.
Yeah, it's very long.
But everyone likes to prick... but Ranil's house, a lot of people, including me and my wife. So anyway. But a lot of people prick holes in the Aragale, because in every policy it doesn't have some perfect sort of alignment. But the core for the Aragale is governance. The Aragale understood that we crashed because of the management and governance deficit, not just because of the economic weaknesses.
I think
but now the narrative has been changed,
the
right?
narrative has been changed.
Yes,
now,
that it was the economic crisis was because of the Aragale and not vice versa. And I'm seeing it all over the place.
Crisis predates the Aragale.
Exactly.
And cause and effect is not a...
And I can tell you confidently, if they didn't introduce the tax cuts, Sri Lanka's economy would not have collapsed. We had $8 billion in reserves. So there's no way we would have collapsed. So we collapsed simply because of, I would say, that one major decision.
Right.
That's why we collapsed.
And a few others with the
agriculture, fertilizer issue and things like that.
But you can't find any literature, articles, interviews of people from that time that spoke against this. You can't find it. It's
the
including like the chambers, right?
Certainly the majority, the 2/3 they had nodded along with everyone.
Yeah.
With everything that Gota wanted to do. I mean, some of them are lauded now, right? Like Kanchana,
but they're still nodding along to every bill that's being put forward without even reading it.
Right. The point is that these stars in this cabinet, they're doing the same thing they did before. They're just nodding along to whoever is at the front.
Right.
That's not why you're a cabinet minister. You're a cabinet minister to take a decision on your subject matter. And if you disagree with the decision being taken, stand up and say it. Exactly. But here, nobody's going to stand up and say anything against Ranil now, because Ranil is the guy with all the brains. So you don't want to disagree with him. Because you're not confident in what you think. So you're never going to question him.
Oh, you're happy with your little perks that you're getting. That's the biggest thing, right?
And also, what is the capability of these MPs in Parliament? These upper-passing fellows.
Yeah, I mean, I get a bit slammed when I say that there should be educational requirements for politics.
I think so. It's a basic.
Well, other people don't like it.
Well, even when we spoke to your leader, he also didn't like it.
Because there's a lot of people who can't afford a good education, they say, right?
But that's the whole point of having an education that's accessible to everybody.
No, but in a democratic system...
The majority of them don't even have an O-level.
No, but say somebody who doesn't have an education qualification but has experience in a certain field or activism.
But it's also not relevant too, because in the finance ministry, there were people with PhDs, right? So did any of them stand up? Did you see the monetary? Okay, in the monetary board that made the decisions on regarding money printing, there was one resignation. Mr. Nihal Fonseca resigned 6 months into the Gota thing, because I think he saw how it was going.
Yeah.
The other members of the monetary board did not resign. And those are some of the people who should have resigned, because they are very senior. They are people who have made their money. They are people who are very respected in the financial sector, and they have very little to lose, because you don't get paid a lot for being on the monetary board. It's not a big income. So you could easily have stepped back and said, I don't like the way this is going. I don't like that Kabral is talking about homegrown solutions when our debt is already unsustainable. But that didn't happen. You didn't see a long list of people, queuing up with their resignation letters in the
He
finance
was
ministry.
demigod status by then, no?
So that brings me to this particular tweet from publicfinance.lk that talks about revenue. So if you look at revenue from 22 to 23, there has been a significant increase, but that has all come from VAT. Now personally, I don't see this as an achievement because VAT disproportionately affects the poor.
Poor, exactly.
Right? If you're low income, it takes a higher slice of your lower income.
Exactly.
And if you're higher income, it takes, it's the same proportion, right? I mean, it's the same amount. So basically, it's a revenue increase on the backs of the working poor and the middle class that has basically got us there. So, how would SJB tackle the revenue issue? And also, let me just bring, the issues of corruption. Like we have to tackle corruption. Can we expect the SJB to do that, considering some of the elements within the party itself which are problematic to most of us? And also with all these crossovers, people are being accepted. I mean, how do we know that we're not going to get the same old with the SJB? Because investment requires that we have, a government acting in good faith, that investors are able to bring in their money without, solicitation of bribes and all the things that we have seen in the past. I think that's where we lose, right? I think a lot of investment is lost because people just don't want to come to a country where there's so much corruption, right? So one, how do you increase revenue in the backdrop of all of this? What is the SJB's answer to this?
So I'll go back to 2016. When I voted for the UNP, I naively expected that the cabinet would include people like Dr. Harsha or Honorable Era. I thought these would be the core of the cabinet.
Right.
But instead, just go and take a look at the cabinet that the Yahapana government put out. I think Dr. Harsha De Silva was Deputy Foreign Minister or something like that, completely unrelated to finance and the economy.
Yeah.
And if you look at again, I'll go back to the IMF prescription in 2016, they talked about wealth taxes, they talked about capital gains taxes, they talked about transaction taxes. So again, they talked about personal income tax, revamping personal income tax. None of that happened, right? So all of that right now, I think if you're earning 100,000 rupees even, you're taxed.
Yes.
So the only way to reduce that burden on someone who barely scraping by is to increase the number of taxpayers.
Absolutely.
Right? So again, it's not new. 2016, they said the same thing: increase the tax net, broaden your tax base. Right. So these are things that should have happened 10 years ago.
There's no way to do that.
And also, what about getting in the people who are not paying taxes?
That's what
It's
I'm
like
saying.
they are in uncollected taxes.
Anecdotally, in the tourism industry, now that we are paying VAT, our suppliers need to give us VAT invoices.
And
right?
they're not.
And there are major brands that don't give us VAT invoices. In fact, I brought it up with a association sort of our body.
Yeah.
And no one seems to care. We brought it up
that is
with the
pure
top.
tax avoidance, right?
Yeah.
I think you have to hold the audit companies to account. You have to hold the tax
Oh,
authorities
that's a
to
big
account.
one there, because
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
audit companies have
I think
been
whoever comes in,
actually
if there's genuine effort,
complicit in asking
change
people
this,
what to
there
do,
will be a
not to
hell of a
pay
lot
tax.
of inertia and resistance to that kind of change from within the system, right?
Yeah.
I mean, does
But,
this we have a solution?
But they also, what are the main revenue generators in a structure? The tax department and the customs.
Yeah.
Right? We both know that those
The worst.
departments are the worst
Absolutely
departments,
the
right?
worst.
So the first thing you do is overhaul. And I don't mean overhaul like change the guy who's at the top. It means you have to spend maybe the equivalent of half of our defense budget on revamping that. It has to be not a 10-year investment, it has to be a generational investment where you increase technology, where you bring in systems, and let's face it, it's not that difficult because you see in the hit ad, there are $2 million apartments going for sale.
Yep.
And people are buying them. You see the roads, you see the vehicles, and you know how much those vehicles cost. You can see how much people go to and spend at a restaurant or at a club.
Yeah.
So you're telling me it's difficult to tax wealth?
No, it's not.
Right?
It's
It
not.
can't be that
There's no
difficult.
will.
Yeah.
There's absolutely
But
no will.
again, not unique to Sri Lanka. Everywhere in the world, wealth taxes have been extremely controversial. And when they've been brought in, they've been removed in the next few years saying they don't generate enough tax. So we know why, right? It's because there's this,
India, case in point.
yeah, and there's always this relationship between money, power, and government,
Power.
right? So this is where the problem is. I was in the banking sector. I can't mention the name of the conglomerate. or even the industry, but there was a major group that owns 4 companies that have a 90% market share. All 4 companies were on a tax holiday. All 4 of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Even Nishan also.
He brought this up very clearly for us.
Yeah. So this is not something
and
that's...
they're not companies that need a tax holiday because they're already they're already profitable.
That's the point.
So, tax holidays to incentivize someone to come and invest or something like that.
Yeah. So the other thing is, I have to say, unfortunately, when it comes to politics, you have to put a little bit of faith in the personal integrity of the people at the top of a party or a team. Okay, so that is down to each one of us to decide on a personal level when we vote, do I trust this person or not? So my point of view, I've been supportive of the SJB. That doesn't mean I have 100% faith in the integrity of every single person on the SJB. But I can only vouch for what I have seen firsthand, and what I've seen in the main 4 or 5 characters in the SJB is, I see a level of integrity that's higher than what I've seen previously. That's just my personal opinion, and there's no way for me to prove that to you. If I can just mention, because now I'm a member of the SJB because I was invited by Sajid Premadas. Now, Sajid Premadas, to me, being a UNPer in the 2000s, or let's say 2016, he seemed like the natural heir to the UNP, right? He seemed like a sort of antidote to Ranil, in the sense that Ranil is so metropolitan, he's so cosmopolitan, right? When the entire country was at war, Ranil Wickremesinghe found himself on the other side of that war, in a weird kind of sense, right? And when, for example, when CBK sacked him in 2002, it's not that she just woke up and decided to sack him, it's that she was under pressure from her party because Ranil was trying to sign the interim self-governing authority agreement with Prabhakaran and the LTTE. Now, whether you or I agree with that, the majority of the country were against it. And that's why Ranil, after coming and doing a certain job to stabilize the economy in 2001, 2002, he could never bring along the rest of the country because he was going for something that the majority didn't want. So, again, it just comes down to this point of, when I looked at Sajid Premadas, I saw someone who has the ability to appeal to the sections of the country that Ranil Wickremesinghe has never appealed to. Never in a million years, the rural. And remember that 80% of our country is rural. You can go and look at 80% of Sri Lanka is considered rural by global standards. That's who, and I'm not an arch UNPer, but I still saw that the UNP was a far better option than the SLFP. But they were never going to be an outright majority with Ranil at the helm. Right? So, but I always thought, okay, because Ranil is a guy who will keep things in check, he's Mr. Clean, at least he'll keep these people in check. I learned my lesson. I looked like a fool in 2016 when the bomb scam happened. I admit that openly, right?
And it's continuing, right? There are sequels.
Yes. Now, I'm not saying that Mrs. Premadas is a perfect candidate, right? But I'll tell you a few things that appeal to me. Firstly, he had an opportunity to take a few people from the UNP, when Maithripala gave him the opportunity, and become Prime Minister ahead of Ranil. He had several opportunities to do that. He didn't do that. He didn't want to betray the party where he is clearly, because of his father's connection, he has some love for that UNP. So he didn't want to betray Ranil. He did that quite a few times. Again, he could have done that with Gota. He said, no, let's go as a joint opposition with the TNA, with the NPP, and let's make sure that we don't take over and have to listen to the SLPP's orders. And I don't know, when he came into politics, the son of Ranasinghe Premadasa could have gotten a nice, safe electorate in Colombo from the UNP. He could have taken Mr. Premadasa's old electorate and won handsomely. What did he do? He went to the poorest district in the country, Hambantota, and he went up against, in the district where it's hardest for the UNP to get a seat, and he beat Mahinda Rajapaksa twice. The only politician in Sri Lanka who has beaten Mahinda Rajapaksa in a general election, and he's done it twice. So I'm seeing someone, I don't agree with him on everything, I have to say that, right? But I see someone who has at least, you say you have some kind of a mandate.
Public appeal.
Popular appeal. Now, the popular appeal is not in our society. I see that. I see that the corporate sector, not very happy with him. A lot of my friends, he doesn't appeal to them. He's a teetotaler. He's quite...
a dictionary whole story.
So, and he's very, he's pro-Buddhist. No, I'm a Sinhalese Buddhist. I'm the least Sinhalese Sinhala Buddhists and the least Buddhist Sinhala Buddhists you will meet, right? I'm not a teetotaler. I eat meat. At least with Sajid Premadasa, I can tell you when he's doing these things, it's not performative. The guy really believes in Buddhist philosophy. I mean, if you question him on it, you'll be sat there for a long time because he knows a lot about this stuff. And before I joined the SJB, it was very recently, but I had worked for the campaign when Mr. Premadasa ran for president. Just a friend of mine said, can you help with this event and help with these flyers and help with these speeches? I said, okay, I'll do it. I had no great, I didn't know much about this. I just know this was a breakaway party. But I went to an event that the SJB had hosted. It was the UNP that hosted the event, and Sajid Premadasa was speaking. I have listened to Anurukumara Dissanayake a lot recently, but also previously. And in terms of rhetoric and in terms of style, no one compares to Anurukumara Dissanayake, in my personal opinion, right? He has a way of meeting the listener in the heart and mind. He speaks to the soul of the person speaking, and he brings in these ideas that are central to Marxism. So if you meet a Marxist and they don't have a good rhetoric, they are failing Marxist. So the main thing you should have as a Marxist-Leninist is this deep understanding of the social issues that drive people, a deep understanding of the working class, where you're able to communicate that, right? I have not seen that from a liberal politician in Sri Lanka. I haven't seen. But when I listened to Mr. Premadasa, the first time I listened to him properly, he started talking about Rousseau and John Stuart Mill and the idea of liberty. And he talked about the social contract. Right? I was surprised because I didn't expect a liberal politician to use that route. So he's using this route to explain why he believes in things like Samudhi. Because, and it might seem controversial, that's a controversial statement to say that you believe in a social safety net, because we are in this sort of environment where anything that the government does is looked upon as a negative. Or you're taking my money, you're giving it to them. So this is this pro-capitalist tendency that we've all grown up in. We all think that it's normal that an entity, a private limited, it's normal for us to believe that a private limited entity should focus only on profit and that they shouldn't care about anything else. So if they care about the environment, it's called CSR, and we think that's normal. So it's normal in our perspectives now, in the modern world, we think it's normal for a company to do whatever it wants in the pursuit of profit. Would you accept that from a human being? If a human being said, I don't care what I do because my main mandate is to make money, you wouldn't accept. So why do we accept it from a corporation? Right? So to make that kind of argument, I like how Mr. Premadasa approaches that argument. And I think whatever else people say about him, I think he's got some baseline that he believes in. So he's not malleable in the way that Ranil Wickremesinghe is. Now Ranil Wickremesinghe, you ask him about abolishing the executive presidency. What's he going to say? You ask him about, he's
been on both sides of every position.
Yeah. Exactly. So you ask him about, they asked him in that...
anyway, it's too late to abolish it now. That's the way we look at it.
They asked him about, in the DW interview, they asked him about international investigations. And he said, no, our country doesn't believe in international investigations. This is the guy who was calling for international investigations.
Exactly. He's going to bring every side of everything.
So that's my support for Mr. Premadasa is based on those things. That's what I can say.
Okay, so we've gone over the hour mark.
Oh yeah, sure.
Would you mind a few more minutes?
I'm
is that
at
all right?
your disposal. So I'm on holiday, right?
You have a question. Go ahead. That's Auntie Maubrey, by the way.
She's the most politically savvy person at the table.
She's been in the arena for a while. Go ahead.
Two questions and two answers.
You're better off there. You were okay, let's see if you don't mind that. Yeah, you were actually in camera.
And hold the mic.
Yeah.
Question is now Ranil is maintaining he has stabilized the economy and he is stable, which we know it's not. I can tell 100 things. But I don't see the SJB contradicting that. This is what maybe I have not listened to everything. He's not doing that. They're not doing that.
The message.
Because with that message, people must understand our economy has shrunk. And the small and medium businesses have shrunk. 60% of the people are below poverty. They don't have 3 meals to eat. I have another example I can just give you. a sad story. Nobody is contesting that. Nobody is talking about that. SJB on the platform will only attack NPP.
Yeah,
that's all. That's all. They are only attacking NPP, not this one. And the second question is, Harsha always talks about we need now. Yes, we have this. We have the IMF agreement and all those things. Maybe we needed it at that time, or we should not have gone to it, or gone to it earlier. Maybe we had to do some changes. You can't just
agree to everything.
Forget about it. That is one thing that been there. Our revenue earning tax, of course, we all know we have to increase the base of collective taxes. But that's also not enough. When you say garment industries and tea, we are not earning enough revenue, dollars to this country to pay even our loans. We have to pay them anyway, all these rescheduling everything after 27, we have to pay. Maybe we have to borrow and pay. That whole cycle will go on forever. But what are we doing? What has the SJB done to make contact with the surrounding countries to make business contacts? He says already we have to build bridges, India, so many states, and other countries. What have you done so far? I mean, with this guy coming, we had 2 years. I mean, you don't have to wait till the government, you get the power to your hand to do those things. Have you made any contacts? So, because without earning foreign exchange, we are not going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, tea industry is going to be competitive. It's competitive. We are not so huge. Major income is really from these poor workers. If you say the garment industry, they talk of revenue of their bringing. You export 100,000, but we import 70% of that is imported. Small amount. The benefit to the country is employment. Margins are less than 9%. So there is no huge generation of foreign currency there. So I would still say these workers and whatever we do in tea. I don't know rubber and coconut how much you have. So what have you done? I have seen your
What tangible steps have the SJB taken?
This connection. You can't do it.
Exactly.
We get the power and we will do it.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I'll only say that it's very difficult for an opposition party to make investment relationships abroad. That's just difficult. But what you can do, and what I hope they've done, I don't know if they've done it, is to give signals to foreign investors in other countries about the environment that we can create in Sri Lanka for them to come, right? So if you look at foreign direct investment in Sri Lanka, there's only one type of foreign direct investment. It's usually some kind of state-linked organization in the case of China Merchant Organization, China Harbour, whatever, or it's Adani, which is also a quasi-state-backed private institution, right? We don't have any sophisticated investors, we don't have manufacturing capital, and why is that? A lot of reasons, but the obvious reason is cost, right? So cost component, the most popular thing everyone's now, there's a bill in Parliament about labour. They're saying our labour is too expensive, our labour is inflexible, we have to pay too much, the cost, etc., right? That's true, there might be some aspect of that, but that's only a problem if you're looking at these low margin commodity-based exports. Once you go into high-tech exports, you have to pay more anyway for your labour, because that labour is more skilled. Right, so the SJB isn't going to look at this labour as the main restriction. The main restriction is energy costs, right? Yeah. So, in terms of our energy costs, we have the highest energy costs in the region, right? We also, our main problem, as you pointed out, is that we don't have enough dollars. The only way to earn dollars is through exports, right? Now, exports means even tourism is an export. Yeah. Even remittance sending dollars, that's also technically an export. But I want you to, if you just look up online, there's something called Dutch disease. There's something called Dutch disease. Okay, it's a concept in economics. It came from the Netherlands. The Netherlands, throughout its economic history, was famous for its agricultural mechanization, its agricultural sector. That was what its main revenue foreign exchange earner was. Then, today, if you look at one of the most in-demand items in the world in manufacturing is the semiconductor. You know the semiconductor, it's just a microchip, and the smaller the microchip, the more advanced. The machine, the highest level quality of microchips of semiconductors are made in Taiwan. But those machines that create them are Dutch. So over a period of time, a 20-30 year period, the Dutch went from being very good at agriculture to being extremely good at building these machines. But when they started building these machines, it had an impact on their currency, because their currency became stronger as their economy developed. And that's what Dutch disease is. And it's happening in Sri Lanka, whereby we are getting an influx of dollars from tourism and remittances. When we are getting an influx of dollars, the rupee increases in value.
Appreciates, makes our exports more expensive.
That makes our exports, the real exports, the tradable exports, less competitive.
Yeah.
Tradable exports is where the margins are.
Yeah.
If you look at any country, even especially there was a good report during the COVID period, they looked at all the countries and their foreign exchange reserves. Every country had, I'm talking tens of billions of dollars of foreign exchange reserves except us.
Yeah.
And the only thing that was different is that we don't have an industrial sector like those countries.
Yeah.
We can testify to that. Tourism.
So one of the things that the SJB, maybe it hasn't done this and I don't know how we could do it right now, but the SJB has a plan to join these global production networks. It's the only way that we are going to come out of this debt.
Yes.
There is no other way.
There is no other way.
There's absolutely no other way.
There's absolutely no other way.
And on your point about not attacking the regime, it's the problem I see is that Ranil has been quite smart at attaching himself and this government to the IMF. So that if you attack him, you're attacking the IMF. And members of the SJB might be very ingratiated because also, end of the day, I'm not Dr. Harsha Disluva. He might be the finance minister. He can't now in this thing say, we don't agree with this IMF program, I don't agree with this target, I think they're making a problem with debt restructuring, and then next year go and negotiate with the IMF. It will be tough. I mean, it just depends on the kind of person also. Maybe some people are very comfortable being aggressive in one forum and then sitting in front of that person and being aggressive. Maybe some people are not like that. So I think there's a little bit of a cat and mouse where we can't necessarily be as critical of the government because the government will say, oh, it's the IMF. So that means you don't agree with the IMF. Yeah.
That is what he's talking about because of the IMF.
Yes.
All these
Everything is good.
That's correct.
And can I make one more point? Because what I mentioned before of these divergent economies, what you say to a person in, say, the Sabaragamuwa province or in Unaragala, for instance, will be completely different to what you say to someone in our society, or a member of the middle class, or a member of the corporate class.
Maybe we are not hearing, I mean, right now there are pocket meetings, there are regional things, there are grassroots level.
I don't like having a dual message,
No,
but unfortunately that's what's happening here. We have a dual message. So you can't then emphasize what we are emphasizing right now. If I come and tell you the SJB government is going to increase taxes further because we have to increase taxes, are you going to be happy with the SJB? Not really, right? Because at the end of the day, you all end up paying more taxes. But that's the bitter truth. The bitter truth is that taxes have to go up even further. There is no, and I'll just let you know, the UNP has said this, the NPP has, I lost my mind when I saw this, the NPP went and met the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and they released a statement which I tweeted out. The NPP believes that high corporate taxes and personal income taxes reduces investment. That is the Marxist-Leninist party in this country that's talking about reducing taxes. The SJB is the only party that's focusing on tax to GDP. They're the only party that's, you go and see no other party talking about tax to GDP because every party says, I'll reduce taxes for you, I'll increase taxes for you, I'll do this. No, the SJB has been very consistent. You can increase taxes for me and reduce taxes for you. But tax to GDP can't come down.
Yeah.
Tax to GDP is non-negotiable. It has to go up.
Yeah. NPP overall, I think, has better message discipline than
and it's a
any other party, but they also have some loose cannons, as we have seen over the last couple of weeks.
I have to say, I don't like to attack the NPP, but their policies are a little incoherent. On the one side, AKD goes to India, visits that factory, the milk or cheese factory, comes back and says, no, we don't want foreign investment, we want only the technology. Yeah. Or he'll go and meet Dr. Jaishankar, the foreign minister of India, have a big sing-song and a picture, but he will not mention the 13th Amendment. The main sticking point in India for the JVP should be the 13th Amendment, but he hasn't talked about that. So I'm a little bit concerned that there's a huge incoherence in some of the policy protocols of the NPP, and for some reason it's not been picked up because I think they're grading parties on a curve, right?
Yeah.
In the day, so the NPP is also being graded on a curve, and so is the SJB, right?
Yeah. So I'm not surprised you feel that way. Right? But okay.
Just one more thing.
Sure.
I have been sort of following recently about these surveys done by these people. Sudho somebody, he just asked questions. I saw that more than 50% is not decided.
Yeah.
They said they are not going to vote for anybody. You will get Ranil of course is coming third, SJD and NPP. But more than 50%, up to or they said they are not decided. And I'm getting down from the taxi, I asked that guy, I convinced him, use your right vote. I won't say we as a group, we won't say we are not aligned with the party. You have to decide, vote for the best person in your thing. So that is whatever you are doing, whatever all these parties are doing, that 50% of the people will decide where we are going.
Yeah.
At the end, they have not made the decision. I was looking at some of the people, those who are saying NPP was very straight. Anna Kumar. Then they were even studied, they gave a little while and answer 50%. I watched few every day, not decided.
I think next week we need Auntie Maubrey as our guest. What do you think? I think we need you as our guest next week.
But it makes perfect sense to be undecided because a lot of the parties haven't put out their full manifestos yet. So if you're already decided also, you have to ask the question, how have you decided on what is the reason for the decision that you made either way, right? So fair enough if people haven't decided. I
In fact, NPP especially is getting a lot of criticism for not putting especially the economic message out.
It's fair.
In a more
I think it's
coherent
fair
way. Although
because
he spoke to Chaturanga, he sat here.
I listened to that interview. I clips of it.
So
It's quite good. But again, Chaturanga makes he makes a very good critique of the IMF. He has used words like neo-imperialist institution, a little bit over the top for my liking, but he's made that critique.
Yeah.
But on the other side, the NPP, if you read their Rapid Response Manifesto, which came out in 2022, they talk about joining global production networks and this international system of global trade. But they're also very critical of the global trade regime and what the emphasis that places on countries like France. So there's
but they did make the point that they will continue with the IMF program, that it'll be renegotiated just as the SJB have said. So can I, one last question.
Sure.
Your area is on foreign policy as well. So right now, Indian elections I think has been decided.
Yeah.
Right now there's a bit of a tug of war, India, China, the West and all of that, and we are maintaining our position of non-alignment, which means we are either with everyone or we're with no one.
Yeah, interesting.
Right, we're sending labor to Israel, but we're also critical, we're supporting Palestine.
So we're running with the hair and hunting with the folks at the moment.
Right, exactly. So what is your view in terms of what SJB foreign policy will be?
Let me ask you all, do you view Sri Lanka as a non-aligned country?
No, I don't know.
Not really.
It
depends on who's in power. I mean, when the Rajapaksas were in power, we knew we were very closely aligned to China, right? With Ranil being in charge, he's more the conservative.
When I ask you that question, the thing you have to look at is take our country's foreign policy in 2010 and assume that we are non-aligned. That is this point we are here, non-aligned 2010. Then look at the country's trajectory from 2010 to 2024. Look at the Chinese footprint, how entrenched they are in Sri Lanka's economy. Some would say society because there's a port city, etc. Right? So if you start at 2010 and you say we are non-aligned here, which is everyone is saying they're non-aligned even today, and you track what's actually happening in reality up to 2024, you have to at least accept that we are less non-aligned than we were in 2010. But you will not find that in the foreign ministry officials, the foreign secretary, the foreign minister, God knows what he says sometimes. They're all on this non-aligned thing, right? Can you say you're non-aligned when one of the major powers in the world has control over a port and has built an artificial island on the southern tip of a regional power that they are competing with on a border. Right? India has a border dispute with China on their own border. And the Sri Lanka government said, "Now build an island and we'll give you full rights over this island, commercial property." Commercial property what is it? Where is the commercial? So this golf course, and what else do they have at the port city? And how many years has the port city been?
Marina and things like that.
And remember, these were bank funded. So someone sat in a bank and approved a facility for an artificial island, having no idea what is going to happen to that island. Does that sound?
China.
Yeah, not our money. So exactly, ask the question, why did they decide to fund this random island?
Yeah, so geopolitically, you can't say you're non-aligned.
You can say you're non-aligned, but who's going to believe you, right? And in that sense, can you say you're non-aligned, but you have to then get approval from one country to let a research vessel from another country dock in your port?
So where would SJB stand on that?
Tough question, very tough question, because I'm answering this question in a situation where we may have to go in for bilateral relations in terms of loans, right?
Yes.
The only alternative to the capital markets is bilateral borrowing. So you have to be very careful how you manage that.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is, I'm a realist in terms of international relations. So I believe that foreign policy is primarily determined now in the current context. Everyone thinks foreign policy and they think economics. But foreign policy is actually not just trade and economics, it's also security and defense. So Sri Lanka as an island, we are where we are. We are in the neighborhood of a very powerful country. We are in it's called India's traditional sphere of influence. So you have to first of all understand where you are. We are in India's backyard. If we have a problem with any country, we shouldn't have it with India, because they are the country that's closest to us, that they can most easily attack us, right? And I'll just go into just a little bit of politics on this. Indian relations with Sri Lanka has always been complicated. Why? Because inherently most Sri Lankan people know that the war with the LTTE had something to do with India. Are you guys aware that Indira Gandhi laid out a plan to invade Sri Lanka during her time, just before she was assassinated?
Go back to before, that our own policies gave birth to divisive politics
100%,
that
100%.
created the scenario. I think Indira Gandhi's story came
100%,
much later.
But the fact
So go back to 1948 and before that.
Problems, right? Various.
Sure. But the point
We dug that grave ourselves.
The point of the matter is that there is a very powerful country that's less than 100 kilometers away where a major leader had a plan to invade Sri Lanka for whatever reason, let's say. But it's but that came out a few years ago in a document on classification of documents. So the average Sri Lankan voter intrinsically knows that the LTT were trained in India,
South India,
right? And there's plenty of evidence now that it wasn't the Tamil Nadu government only, the central government. They trained the LTT and Prabhakar in RAW camps in the north of India as well. Okay, so all this is fact.
But all those are 80s, no? But we need to look at the root of the problem is 40s, 30s.
But even if the whole problem, idea is sovereignty. The idea is having some kind of. So the point you're making is, if a country is attacking its own civilians, there is a reason to intervene. That's the argument you're making, right? So that's a tough question. So should the United States have invaded or sent forces to Syria because Assad was killing his people? How do you answer that question? Right. Because by the time the US invaded Syria, there were 200,000 people that were killed. Today, because of Palestine and Israel, people are saying the United States isn't intervening enough to save those people. But in Iraq, when the United States invaded, the whole thing was about anti-interventionism. So these are not easy questions to answer, but what I'm saying is, from the basic standpoint of your average Sri Lankan, there is a distrust with India.
That's 3 millennia old.
But so that you can't simply supersede and say, well, we have to link ourselves to the Indian economy, that's the only way to grow.
But Vijay, where did Vijay come from?
And the land bridge and
the land bridge
question, right?
Yeah.
I've seen multiple papers. Learn Asia had done one. I think there was a couple other authors who did some studies on the economic benefits of a physical connectivity to India. Remember, there's two things. Physical land connectivity to India and connecting the two economies are two completely different things. You can be connected to the grid even. You can have visa-free access. You can have all those things. You can have free trade. But having a physical connectivity between the northern peninsula, the southern peninsula of India and the Jaffna Peninsula, any security expert, I'm not a security, I did international
We
relations.
had a train that went from Rameswaram to Mannar on a daily basis.
So the idea is that it stokes a certain amount of fear.
The ferry, but
The ferry.
it still was one that you could get in Colombo and go all the way to North India.
Yeah.
So, but even the ferry is slightly different to having a bridge, right? I mean,
Just
it is. I mean, at the end of the day,
same thing. Same, you could get in the same
because
compartment and
the idea of having an island is that you are protected by something. Right? So for example, in Russia, sorry, not relevant to this, but you've heard of the Crimean Peninsula.
Yeah.
The Crimean Peninsula was initially invaded by Russia, primarily because it's a strategic,
to the ocean.
It's a strategic import because it's on a hill and it has a supply route that can come directly from Russia.
Yeah.
And so the geographic aspect plays a part in defense. So all I'm saying is you can have this discussion about a land bridge and physical connectivity to India, but don't do it with only the economic argument. Bring the security aspect into it, and if there's a criticism of the security aspect, engage with it. What I've seen most often with, and Ranil Wickremesinghe is a perfect example of this, is that when he has an idea, he doesn't care if someone else has something against it. So the 13th Amendment, I am personally not for the 13th Amendment, but I am for self-determination, right? I am for self-determination for anybody. But I view the 13th Amendment as poisonous because it was brought in under duress from the Indian government.
Yeah, the pretext
right?
was
the pretext
issue.
was wrong. Now, that's why Chandrika came up with this, the Union of Regions idea. And that's why we have this contest about whether to have the 13th Amendment, whether to abolish it, etc. My point is Ranil Wickremesinghe was so gung-ho on the 13th Amendment that it opened up an entire window for Mahinda Rajapaksa to creep through, gather the entire nationalist backing of the country and attack the liberals. That's what happened. And Ranil keeps swimming towards that. Every time there's an opportunity, he'll swing towards it. So, and the Rajapaksas and the ultra-nationalists, they take full advantage of this.
We have seen that it's a cycle that keeps
Exactly. So we
repeating.
have to exit that cycle because I guarantee you, at the next election cycle, the problem will be India, security, LTT, Islamism. That will be the conversation, not economics, because by then people would have forgotten about this.
Yeah.
And then we'll be back to a couple of guys with Sarthakas waving their hands around. It will be the same thing, I guarantee.
Right. So Kusum,
How comfortable are you in Jaffna?
Not at all. But the idea is, I have been to Jaffna twice in my entire life. I may go again, may not. If the next time I go, someone says you have to put a stamp on your passport and get a visa, I don't care. Like, I'll do it. To go abroad, anyway, you have to get a visa.
Is it comfortable for this election?
Sorry about the SUV. It's a good question. I think it depends on the candidate. So I don't know who the actual candidates are in the general. I think Sajid Premadasa has at least as much popularity as Ranil Wickremesinghe in Jaffna. So I think that's enough because I don't see the other parties doing very well in Jaffna.
there was a news article yesterday about Tamil parties trying to ask
Stop
people to boycott their vote or something like that. I don't know. It looked
The
like a bit of a shenanigan to me.
So it seems
Yeah,
a
it looked like a bit of a
real
shenanigan to me.
fake thing, yeah.
Yeah.
Seems-
Okay, guys, shall
we should-
we?
yeah, we should- we
We've
should.
gone like almost into 1.5 hours now. So you're very generous with your time. So
No,
thank
I'm
you so
happy
much.
to be here, man. I really appreciate and
So-
I love what you guys are doing. Thanks for having me. It's a big pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.
And, yeah, there's nothing better than speaking to
Actually,
consensus.
today felt more like a round table.
Yeah.
Right? Like there was more.
I really
interaction.
enjoyed it, thanks. Because it's good to meet concerned citizens because I think for a lot of time we were just kind of sleepwalking around, not really caring about what's happening in the wider society. We are worried about. So I was in banking for 10 years. I didn't care much about what happens outside until it hits the fan, and then you
Bankers.
have to care. Yeah, exactly.
We know a few bankers.
Exactly.
So usually we end the discussion with a quote
I
that
find it
Disha finds which is appropriate to the discussion. So
this
she has
is
a couple
actually
today.
more to do with elections
Okay.
and on politics. Honesty is an absolute prerequisite to efficient service to the public. Unless a man is honest, we have no right to keep him in public life. It matters not how brilliant his capacity. That is Theodore Roosevelt, and there's another one which I will say I know it's not there. You can't just leave those who created the problem in charge of the solution. So my appeal to Sri Lankan voters is first vote. Don't stay at home, go and vote. But look at the person, it doesn't matter which party. We are not advocating for any one party. Vote for a decent human being.
Even if there are bad elements within a party, the people can reject that.
Yeah.
So that is the beauty of a democratic
system. So can I say to your audience, I may not have done a very good job of convincing you to vote for the SJB, but give a chance to the policies. Go and read what the policies are, and you'll have to take a certain measurement of the people in charge. You'll have to see if you're personally comfortable voting for X, Y, or Z. There's nothing I can say or do to convince anyone of that. I can only say that from the parties, for me, from the cocktail of policies and parties that you have, for me, the SJB represents a very moderate, fairly middle of the road, maybe too moderate, right? Maybe too middle of the road, maybe. But that's who they are. They shouldn't pretend to be anything they're not. Right. So, as a liberal party, as a pro-capitalist party, I think the SJB is the best bet by far, in my humble opinion. Yeah. And I would ask everyone to, just go and read up on the policies, read up on the histories of the personalities that are central to the political party, and see what their personal records are, and see what they've done in their lives before politics, during politics, what they've stood for. And one thing I'll say, I know this is a common criticism of the SJBs. I know, I spent the hour sort of blasting the Yahapalne government. SJB members were part of the Yahapalne government. Where were they when all this happened? Very fair question. Yeah. And I think if you ask a lot of SJB members, honestly, in a private situation, they will say, we should have left that government, or we should have made a bigger fuss when the bond scam happened, or we should have threatened to leave, etc., etc. I think a lot of those politicians right now wish they had made that decision, because we were all not just disappointed, but really let down by Yahapal, right? That's a fact. That's nothing new. No one can escape that.
Hindsight is 2020, right? So
exactly. But there's nothing wrong in asking the SJB, why didn't you raise your voice during that period? Right. And that's a question that a lot of SJBs have to answer.
I think that kind of baggage every party carries. I think that's.
Yeah, but it's a very fair question, and I think
absolutely, and we brought it up earlier too. Yeah. So, Kusum, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Very enlightening talking to you. I think we got through a lot. And maybe you did convince a few, right?
Let's see.
Thank you guys. Thanks
you very much, everybody. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. So, Anu CK, thanks a lot. So, let's wrap it up on day 285 at Good Governance GGY. We'll see you guys we're back at our street corner on Sunday for day 286. We are speeding towards day 300 of doing this. And as for tonight, thank you, Kusum, and thanks to the group. And that's a wrap from us. Good night. Thanks.